The Golden Crown restaurant fell silent as Victor Castellano entered. Chicago's most feared mafia boss commanded respect without uttering a word. The imported Italian marble floor seemed to tremble beneath his measured steps. Victor moved through the space with the quiet confidence of a man who owned not just the building, but the very air inside it. His personal security detail, four men with impassive faces and concealed weapons, maintained a respectful distance, close enough to protect, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. At 54, Victor carried his years with distinguished grace. Silver threaded through his temples, adding gravity to his appearance rather than diminishing it. His tailored Armani suit draped perfectly over broad shoulders that had carried the weight of Chicago's most powerful crime family for over 2 decades. He settled at his regular table, the best in the establishment, with a view of both entrances and all exits, a habit ingrained after years of leadership in a world where vigilance meant survival. The restaurant manager approached with a bottle of 30-year-old Macallan Victor's standing order. Around them, other diners pretended not to notice while stealing furtive glances. The Castellano reputation preceded him throughout the city, a man whose mere presence commanded respect and whose anger had destroyed lives and businesses alike. Yet tonight, as on most nights, Victor appeared relaxed, even genial, as he conferred quietly with his lieutenants over matters that could reshape the city's underworld. "Your usual table, Mr. Castellano," the manager murmured, pouring the amber liquid with practiced precision. "And the chef has prepared your favorite tonight." Victor nodded, a gesture sufficient to dismiss the man. The restaurant staff knew his preferences: scotch-neat privacy and absolute discretion. His inner circle settled around him, discussing territory disputes with practiced nonchalance that belied the gravity of their conversation. "The Donato family is pressing on our shipping interests again," said Michael, his consigliere of 15 years. "They're testing boundaries after the change in leadership." "Let them test," Victor replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had become his trademark. "They'll learn the same lesson their predecessors did." A young waitress appeared at their table, not their usual server. She wore a crisp black uniform with Maya on her name tag. Early 20s, Victor guessed, with an air of intelligence that suggested she was working here to pay for college rather than as a career. Her hands betrayed slight nervousness as she set down their appetizers, but her voice remained steady. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Victor glanced up, ready to dismiss her with the same casual nod he gave all staff. But then his gaze caught on her face, something familiar in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her cheekbones. A strange sense of recognition flickered through him, though he was certain they'd never met. "No, that will be all," he began, but stopped when the young woman's eyes widened, fixed not on his face but on his wrist. The sleeve of his jacket had risen slightly, revealing the intricate constellation tattoo that wrapped around his wrist like a bracelet. 7 stars connected by delicate lines, forming a pattern known only to him and one other person. A design he'd created with Elise 20 years ago during a summer that now felt like another lifetime. "Your tattoo," Maya said, her professional demeanor momentarily forgotten. "My mother has one just like it." The world around Victor Castellano stopped. The restaurant noise faded to a distant hum. His face drained of color, then flushed, then paled again. In that moment, he was no longer Chicago's most feared mafia boss, but a man confronting a ghost from his past that he believed long buried. His security detail tensed, misinterpreting his shock as a threat. Hands moved toward concealed weapons until Victor raised a single finger to halt them. The young waitress stood frozen, suddenly aware she'd said something significant. "Your mother," Victor finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is her name?" The question hung in the air as Maya clutched her serving tray tighter, her knuckles turning white with pressure. Her eyes darted around at the sea of expensive suits and questioning glances before answering. "Elise Parker, sir." The glass of scotch in Victor's hand crashed to the floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces across the imported marble. The sound seemed to reverberate through the suddenly silent restaurant. "How old are you?" he asked, though something in his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. His heart pounded so hard he was certain everyone at his table could hear it hammering against his chest like a prisoner demanding release. 20, sir," Maya replied, growing increasingly uncomfortable as Victor's associates exchanged concerned glances. She took a step back, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake mentioning something so personal to such a powerful man. Victor stood abruptly, towering over his half-eaten meal napkin, falling forgotten to the floor. The restaurant patrons pretended greater interest in their meals, but their furtive glances and hushed whispers told a different story. "Where is she now?" he demanded, voice cracking with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades of building his empire. Michael leaned in, concern evident in his lowered voice. "Boss, is everything okay?" Victor ignored him, his gaze never leaving the young woman's face. Something about her eyes, hauntingly familiar, made him pause when every instinct screamed at him to walk away. The restaurant manager rushed over, apologizing profusely for what he assumed was poor service. Victor silenced him with a look that could freeze blood. "Tell me where you live," he said to Maya. Not as a threat, he added, seeing her hesitation, but with an urgency that surprised everyone at the table. Maya's chin lifted slightly, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "With all due respect, sir, I don't think my mother would want me giving our address to someone I just met, no matter how well connected you might be in this city." Victor pulled out his wallet, not for money, but for a faded photograph he'd kept hidden for 20 years. "Does your mother still have this small birthmark behind her right ear?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper as he showed Maya an old Polaroid of a young woman with the same constellation tattoo. The silence that followed was deafening as Maya's eyes widened in recognition. "How could you possibly know that?" she whispered, her serving tray trembling in her hands as the implications began to dawn on her. "I need to see her," Victor said. No longer a request, but a desperate plea from a man who suddenly realized he might have lost much more than he had ever known. "Please, there are things that happened, things I was told that might not be true." The young waitress looked at the powerful man before her, seeing for the first time beyond the expensive suit and fearsome reputation to something broken and human. "My shift ends at 9, she finally said, writing an address on her order pad. "But I'm warning you, she might not want to see you after all this time." Victor stared at the address, his hand shaking slightly, a display of vulnerability his associates had never witnessed. "Thank you," he said simply, slipping the paper into his pocket. Maya nodded once and backed away, returning to her duties with a measured calm that belied the turmoil in her mind. "Boss," Michael ventured cautiously, "what's going on?" Victor sat down heavily, his eyes distant. "Clear my schedule for tonight. All of it." His tone brooked no discussion, and his men knew better than to press further. As Maya disappeared into the kitchen, Victor's mind raced back to the summer of 2004. The memories he'd locked away for 20 years came flooding back with overwhelming clarity. The summer air hung heavy with promise, as Victor Castellano, heir to Chicago's most powerful crime family, spotted Elise Parker reading poetry in Grant Park. He was 34, then already deeply entrenched in the family business, but still occasionally haunted by youthful dreams of a different life. She wore cut-off jeans and a university sweatshirt, worlds away from the polished women who typically sought his attention. "What are you reading?" he had asked, surprising himself with his interest. Elise looked up, unimpressed by his designer clothes or the two bodyguards hovering discreetly nearby, and showed him her worn copy of Pablo Neruda's Love Sonnets. "Do you actually read poetry, or is this just your approach?" she had asked, her directness catching him off guard. Instead of being offended, Victor had laughed, a genuine laugh that felt unfamiliar on his lips. "Both," he admitted, "though I prefer Borges to Neruda." That unexpected literary reference earned him a second look. Their conversation lasted hours, spanning literature, philosophy, and dreams, carefully circumnavigating who he was and what he did. For one afternoon, Victor had been just a man talking to a fascinating woman in a park, the weight of the Castellano name temporarily lifted from his shoulders. Their romance blazed like wildfire, intense, consuming, and against all reason. Elise, a nursing student from a working-class family, knew who the Castellanos were, but saw beyond Victor's notorious family to the man who quoted poetry and dreamed of legitimacy. "We'll leave this all behind," Victor promised one night, as they lay beneath the stars at his lake house, tracing the constellation pattern they designed together on a napkin. "My father's business, the family name, none of it matters compared to what I feel for you." For 3 perfect months, Victor kept Elise separate from his world, meeting her between family obligations and the increasing pressure from his father to take his rightful place in the organization. She became his escape, his glimpse of a different life where choices weren't predetermined by blood. Victor had never known freedom like those summer days, walking anonymously through Chicago neighborhoods, eating at small diners where no one knew his name, discussing books and dreams instead of territories and vendettas. You're never truly free until you fight for something more important than yourself, Elise had told him one evening as they watched the sunset over Lake Michigan. The words had struck him deeply, highlighting the gilded cage of privilege and fear he'd inhabited his entire life. In Elise's world, choices were made from conviction rather than obligation. Her moral clarity fascinated him as much as her beauty. The pregnancy test changed everything. Two pink lines that represented both dream and nightmare collided as Elise showed Victor the result, with tears in her eyes, uncertain if they were from joy or fear. "My father will never accept this," Victor said, pacing the small apartment Elise shared with two other nursing students. "He has plans for me to marry into the Donato family to strengthen our position against rivals from the east side." His father's reaction was worse than he'd imagined. "Get rid of it," Don Castellano had commanded, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk that had witnessed 3 generations of family decisions. "Or I'll make sure she disappears permanently. Your choice." Victor knew his father's threats were never empty. The old man had eliminated obstacles with ruthless efficiency throughout his reign. The thought of Elise becoming another casualty of the Castellano Empire made Victor physically ill. He gave Elise money for an abortion, tears streaming down his face as he explained the impossible situation. "I can't protect you from my father," he admitted, shame burning his throat like acid. "He'll never let us be a family." The hotel room where they met for the last time became a mausoleum for their dreams. Walls closing in as Elise clutched the envelope of cash with white knuckles. Outside, rain pounded against the windows, nature itself mourning what they were about to lose. Later that night, alone in his father's study, Victor smashed his fist through an antique mirror. The physical pain a welcome distraction from the hollow ache in his chest. The Don watched him passively from his leather chair, a glass of scotch in one hand, satisfaction evident in his cold, calculating eyes. 2 weeks later, Elise called him from a payphone, voice hollow and distant. "I lost the baby," she said, refusing to meet in person. "It's over, Victor. Don't try to find me. Your world and mine were never meant to intersect." He respected her wishes, drowning his grief in work and eventually taking his place as his father's right hand. The old Don died 3 years later, leaving Victor to build the empire into something more powerful and sophisticated, though the hole in his heart remained unfilled. Never once had he suspected she had lied about the miscarriage. Never once had he imagined that somewhere in this city, his child had been growing up without him, carrying half his DNA and none of his burdens. As he sped toward the address Maya had given him, Victor realized how completely Elise had outmaneuvered him. She had protected their child from his world in the only way she could, by making him believe that world didn't exist. The apartment building was in a modest but respectable neighborhood on the city's northwest side. Victor dismissed his driver, standing alone on the sidewalk for the first time in decades, staring up at the third-floor windows, where warm light spilled out into the gathering darkness. His security team protested, but Victor was adamant. "Stay back. This is something I need to do alone." The walk to the building entrance felt longer than it should have. Each step carried the weight of 20 years of absence. He took the elevator to the third floor, his heart thundering in his chest. The last time he had felt this nervous, he had been facing down a rival family with guns drawn. Somehow this felt infinitely more dangerous. The knock on the door came at exactly 9:30 p.m. Victor's knuckles rapped against the wood with a pattern from long ago, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones. A code they had once used to identify each other. Elise Bennett froze at the familiar sound. Her medical textbooks lay scattered across the small lining, typed in where she'd been studying for her nurse practitioner exam. 20 years had passed, but that particular knock was engraved in her memory. "Mom," Maya called from the hallway, "there's someone here to see you." The careful neutrality in her daughter's voice told Elise everything she needed to know before she even opened the door to find Victor Castellano standing in her modest apartment, looking both powerful and somehow lost. Time had been kind to Elise. At 46, her beauty had matured rather than faded. Her hair was shorter now, practical for her profession, and fine lines had formed at the corners of her eyes, evidence of both laughter and worry. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a sweater, but carried herself with the quiet dignity that had first drawn Victor to her. The silence between them stretched like an eternity. 20 years of unspoken words hanging in the air between two people who had once known every inch of each other's souls. Victor broke first, his eyes never leaving her face as he said, "You lied to me about our child." "I protected our child," Elise corrected, chin raised in defiance despite the trembling in her hands. "Your father threatened to make me disappear if I didn't end the pregnancy." Her eyes flashed with the same fire he remembered. "Do you think I believed for 1 second that a man who would kill his grandchild would hesitate to kill me once I was no longer carrying it?" Victor flinched as if physically struck, the truth in her words impossible to deny. The old Don had been capable of exactly that kind of calculated cruelty. "You could have told me after my father died," he said, eyes darting to Maya, who stood watching this exchange with growing understanding. "That was 17 years ago, Elise. And by then you were Chicago's most feared man with rivals and federal agents watching your every move." Elise countered, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. "Should I have brought our daughter into that spotlight, painted a target on her back for every enemy you've made?" The apartment suddenly felt suffocating. Decades of secrets and lies hanging in the air between them. On the wall, a framed photo of Maya's high school graduation showed Elise beaming with pride beside her daughter. A moment Victor had been robbed of witnessing, another piece of time he could never reclaim. Maya stepped forward, interrupting what was quickly becoming a heated argument. "I think I deserve to be part of this conversation, considering it's my existence you're discussing," she said, her voice steady despite the emotional earthquake reshaping her understanding of her own history. Victor turned to really look at his daughter, their daughter seeing now the perfect blend of his features and Elise's in her face. The determined set of her jaw came from him, but the keen intelligence in her eyes was all Elise. His throat tightened with an emotion he couldn't name. "I would have given you everything," he said, quietly addressing both of them. "Security, education, protection, anything you needed." "We needed normal," Elise replied, softening slightly as she gestured around their modest apartment with its water stains on the ceiling and secondhand furniture. "We needed quiet, ordinary lives where Maya could become whoever she wanted to be without the shadow of the Castellano name." Maya glanced between her parents, piecing together the fragments of a history she'd never known existed. "So you're really my father?" she asked Victor, directly studying his face with new intensity. "All these years, Mom said my father died before I was born." "In many ways, that wasn't a lie," Victor answered, surprising both women with his honesty. "The man your mother loved, the one who dreamed of leaving everything behind to build a life with her, he did die, replaced by someone who could survive in my world." Elise moved toward the kitchen, needing distance from the intensity of the moment. "Would anyone like some coffee?" she asked, falling back on hospitality as a defense mechanism against the emotional tidal wave threatening to overwhelm her carefully constructed life. Victor nodded, his eyes never leaving Maya. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said to his daughter, "and I'm not expecting anything from you. But if you're willing, I'd like the chance to know you." Maya sank onto the couch, her world tilting on its axis. "My whole life I thought I knew who I was," she said softly. "And now I find out I'm the daughter of—" She trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. "A monster," Victor supplied, his voice even. "Many people would use that word. Your mother was right to keep you away from me, from what I became after she left." "I didn't say that," Maya replied, studying him with the same analytical gaze he used in business negotiations. "I don't know what to call you yet." The honesty in her response caught Victor off guard. There was no accusation in her tone, just a frank assessment of their situation. Elise returned with 3 mugs of coffee, her hands steadier now that the initial shock had passed. "I never told you because I wanted to protect you," she said to Maya. "Not because I didn't think you deserved to know." "Did you ever plan to tell me?" Maya asked. Elise sighed, setting the mugs down on the coffee table. "I don't know. Every year it became harder to imagine how that conversation would go." Victor sipped his coffee, using the moment to gather his thoughts. "I need to know everything," he said finally. "These 20 years I've missed, I want to know who my daughter is." Maya looked at her mother silently, seeking permission. When Elise nodded, Maya began hesitantly. "I'm studying pre-med at Northwestern. I want to be a pediatric oncologist." Pride swelled in Victor's chest. "A doctor," he said softly. That's wonderful." For the next hour, Maya shared the broad strokes of her life, her academic achievements, her volunteer work at the hospital, her dreams for the future. With each revelation, Victor felt the magnitude of what he had lost, not just time with his daughter, but the opportunity to witness her become this remarkable young woman. Medical school is expensive, Victor noted during a pause in the conversation. I have scholarships, Maya replied quickly, and Mom has been saving since I was born. Working double shifts for years, Victor said, looking at Elise with new respect, to give her opportunities. To give her choices, Elise corrected, something your world never offered. Victor nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. I would like to help, he said, with your education, with anything you need. We've managed just fine without your money for 20 years. Elise interjected, the old defensiveness rising in her voice. Mom, Maya said softly, let's at least hear what he has to say. The tension in the small apartment was palpable as Victor chose his next words carefully. I'm not trying to buy my way into your lives, but if there's anything I can do to make your path easier, Maya, I'd like that chance. The conversation was interrupted by Victor's phone. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped into the hallway, his voice dropping to a whisper. When he returned, the businessman had replaced the father. I have to go, he said, regret evident in his tone. There's a situation that requires my attention. Maya nodded, understanding more about his world than she wanted to. Will we see you again? She asked, surprising herself with the question. If you want to, Victor replied, hope flickering across his features. I'd like that very much. Elise walked him to the door, maintaining a careful distance between them. Whatever you're thinking, she said quietly, remember that she has a life, a good life, that doesn't include the complications your world brings. Victor paused at the threshold, turning to face the woman he had never stopped loving, even when he believed she had taken their future from him. I know that, and I won't do anything to endanger it. As he walked back to his waiting car, Victor's mind raced with implications. He had a daughter, a brilliant, determined young woman who had grown up without the taint of his family's legacy. And somehow, against all odds, she seemed willing to know him. For the first time in decades, Victor Castellano felt something dangerously close to hope. 2 weeks after the shocking revelation, Maya sat across from Victor at his private table in the Golden Crown restaurant, no longer as a waitress, but as his daughter. The tension between them had softened, replaced by a cautious curiosity as they navigated this newfound relationship neither had prepared for. I received your medical school application fee payments, but I can't accept them, Maya said, sliding an envelope across the polished table. Her pride, inherited from both parents, wouldn't allow her to simply take his money, despite her desperate financial situation. Victor left the envelope untouched, studying the determination in his daughter's eyes. It's not charity, Maya. It's 20 years of birthdays, Christmases, and graduations that I missed. He explained, the regret in his voice genuine and raw. My mom worked double shifts for years to give me a normal life. Maya countered, her loyalty fierce and unwavering. She's still paying off loans from nursing school while saving for my tuition. I won't dishonor her sacrifice by taking easy money now. Victor admired her integrity even as he sought a way around her resistance. Before he could respond, the restaurant door swung open and his expression shifted instantly from father to crime boss as his lieutenant approached with urgent news. The Moretti family is moving on the West Side territory, the man whispered, unaware of Maya's identity. Maya watched this transformation with fascination and unease, seeing the dangerous reality her mother had sheltered her from. Is this why she kept me away? She asked after the man departed, gesturing to the subtle but unmistakable signs of Victor's other life. Victor's eyes met hers, unflinching in their honesty. Your mother made the right choice, he admitted, signaling for the check. But circumstances have changed. As they prepared to leave, neither noticed the man watching from a car across the street, his eyes narrowing as he took photographs of Victor Castellano and the young woman who was clearly important to him. The Moretti family had just found their leverage. The following day, Elise received a certified letter informing her that her student loans had been forgiven due to a clerical error. She crumpled the paper in her fist, knowing exactly who was responsible for this unwanted intervention into their carefully constructed lives. 20 years of independence wouldn't be undermined by Victor's wealth, no matter how well-intentioned. You can't just erase 20 years by throwing money at us. Elise confronted Victor that evening on the steps of his mansion where she'd driven directly after her shift. Her nursing scrubs stood in stark contrast to the opulence surrounding them, a physical manifestation of their different worlds. Security personnel tensed at her approach, but Victor waved them off, guiding her inside away from potential watching eyes. The foyer alone was larger than her entire apartment, with soaring ceilings and artwork that probably cost more than her annual salary. "I'm not trying to buy forgiveness, Elise," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "I'm trying to give you both the security you deserve without changing who you are." The contrast between their worlds couldn't have been more stark. Elise's practical nurse's scrubs against the backdrop of Italian marble and priceless art. A life of service versus a life of power, two paths that had diverged 20 years ago at the intersection of love and fear. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago's skyline glittered like a jewelry box of possibilities, a kingdom Victor had built while Elise raised their daughter in the shadows. The city that had kept them apart now forced them together, their separate lives colliding with the force of tectonic plates. The mansion's interior told the story of a man who had everything money could buy and nothing that truly mattered. Pristine furniture sat unused in perfect rooms. Expensive art adorned walls no one ever admired. And silence echoed through spaces designed for a family that had never materialized. "You live alone in all this?" Elise asked momentarily, forgetting her anger, as she glimpsed the emptiness of his existence. Victor didn't answer directly. "The boardroom is down the hall, the study upstairs. I converted the East Wing into a security center." His description sounded more like a corporate headquarters than a home. Elise's trained medical eye noticed other details: a single-place setting at the massive dining table, reading glasses beside a single armchair, the absence of photos or personal mementos throughout the immaculate space. For all his power and wealth, Victor Castellano lived a solitary life. "Why did you pay off my loans?" she asked, returning to the reason for her visit. "Because I can," he answered simply, "because it's something I should have been doing all along." "That wasn't your choice to make," Elise countered. "You can't just appear after 20 years and start making decisions about our lives." "Our daughter wants to be a doctor," Victor said, the pride evident in his voice. "And you've carried that burden alone for 2 decades. Let me help, Elise. Not to replace you or take over, but to support what you've built." Before she could respond, Victor's phone rang, the screen lighting up with an urgent message that drained the color from his face. "Maya's been followed from her evening class," he said, already moving toward the door, pulling Elise alongside him. "My security team just spotted Moretti's men tracking her back to your apartment." "This is exactly what I feared," Elise whispered as they sped through the Chicago streets in Victor's armored car. "Your enemy's learning about her, using her to get to you. The nightmare scenario I protected her from for 20 years is unfolding, despite my precautions." Victor gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I'll send you both away to tonight. New identities, new location, completely untraceable." He promised, already formulating plans to erase their existence. "Or you can come under my protection, where no one would dare touch what belongs to a Castellano." The Castellano family compound sprawled across 3 acres of heavily guarded lakefront property, a fortress disguised as a luxury estate. Elise and Maya had reluctantly accepted Victor's protection after the threat from the rival Moretti family became too dangerous to ignore. "This will be temporary," Elise insisted as she unpacked their hastily gathered belongings in the guest house. Though spacious and elegant, it felt like a beautiful cage to a woman who had spent 20 years maintaining her independence from Victor's world. Maya adapted more quickly than her mother, fascinated by this glimpse into her father's life and the legacy that, whether she wanted it or not, was partially hers. "Have you always lived here?" she asked Victor over breakfast on their third morning, her curious eyes absorbing every detail of the mansion's grand dining room. Victor watched his daughter adjust the napkin on her lap, a small, refined gesture that reminded him so much of his own mother. Genetics were strange that way, passing down mannerisms across generations, even without direct contact. "I grew up in this house, though it's changed considerably since then," Victor replied. "My father ruled through fear, but I've built something more sophisticated: legitimate businesses, political connections." Maya nodded, processing this information alongside everything else she'd learned about her newfound father over the past days. She observed the way staff interacted with him, their deference tinged with a fear they tried to conceal. They called him Sir, with a reverence that bordered on religious. Elise entered the dining room, her hospital ID badge clipped to her scrubs. Despite the circumstances, she refused to miss her shifts. I appreciate the security detail, Victor, but they cannot follow me onto hospital floors, she stated firmly, pouring coffee into a travel mug. My patients deserve privacy. The Morettis have eyes everywhere, Victor argued, concern etched on his face. At least let my men drive you and maintain a perimeter. The tension between them was palpable, 2 decades of separate lives creating fundamentally different approaches to danger. Victor's instinct was to control and fortify. Elise's was to maintain normalcy and independence. Maya observed this clash of philosophies with keen interest. Her mother had raised her with unwavering principles: never compromise. Your values, never let fear dictate your choices. Yet here was her father, a man who had built an empire on calculated risk and strategic fear, offering a different kind of wisdom. That afternoon, while Elise was at work and Victor attended to business, Maya explored the mansion's east wing, discovering a library filled with first editions and rare manuscripts. She ran her fingers along leather-bound spines, finding unexpected common ground with the father she was just beginning to know. A leather-bound copy of Pablo Neruda's love sonnets caught her eye, the same collection her mother kept on her nightstand, its pages worn from years of reading. The coincidence sent a shiver down her spine, a tangible connection to the love story that had created her, then been severed before she was born. Outside the library windows, armed guards patrolled the manicured grounds, a stark reminder that this world of culture and refinement was built on a foundation of violence and power. Maya wondered how many of these men knew who she was, the secret daughter suddenly thrust into the spotlight of a dangerous family legacy. My grandmother's collection, Victor explained, finding Maya absorbed in a volume of Renaissance poetry. She believed education was the true path to power, not the family business my grandfather built. His voice carried a wistful quality that Maya had never heard before. Your mother reminds me of her sometimes, that same unwavering moral compass, that certainty about right and wrong. Maya studied her father's face, searching for traces of herself in his features. And who do I remind you of? Victor smiled, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. Both of us in different ways. You have your mother's compassion and my stubbornness, a dangerous combination. The peaceful moment shattered as Victor's security chief burst in his expression, grave. We've intercepted communications, he reported. The Morettis know about your daughter and her mother. They're planning to use them as leverage in the territory dispute. Victor's transformation was immediate and terrifying. Gone was the contemplative father sharing family history, replaced by a man whose cold fury made the temperature in the room seem to drop. Move them to the lake house tonight, he ordered. Triple the security and tell no one, not even our own people. Maya watched this metamorphosis with a mixture of fascination and fear. In an instant, she understood why her mother had kept her away from this world, not just to protect her physically, but to shield her from becoming accustomed to this duality, this ability to shift between humanity and calculated violence without hesitation. I have an exam tomorrow, Maya protested when informed of the plan, and Mom has patients who depend on her. We can't just disappear because some rival of yours is making threats. Victor paced the library, torn between his desire to protect his newly discovered family and his respect for the independent lives they'd built without him. 20 years ago, I let your mother make the decision to keep you safe, he finally said. I won't make the same mistake twice. The lake house, though called such, was actually a remote compound in northern Wisconsin, accessible only by private road and protected by state-of-the-art security systems. Elise stood at the window watching the sunset reflect off the water as Maya explored the rustic but luxurious interior. He's trying to put us in a gilded cage, Elise whispered when her daughter joined her. I've spent your entire life making sure you could make your own choices. And now this, she gestured to the armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Maya was silent for a long moment, processing everything that had happened since that fateful day at the restaurant. Maybe we don't have to choose between his world and ours, she finally said, surprising her mother with her insight. Maybe there's a middle path where we accept his protection without sacrificing who we are. With 6 days at the lake house passed in intense isolation before Victor arrived with news. The immediate threat has been neutralized, he announced. The vague phrasing telling both women more than explicit details would have about what had transpired in Chicago during their absence. Elise watched him carefully, seeing both the man she had loved and the dangerous figure he had become. "We need to talk about what happens next," she said quietly. "This situation is forcing us to make decisions we're not prepared for." Victor nodded, following her outside onto the dock, where privacy from both security personnel and Maya would allow for honest conversation. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and approaching winter as they stood side by side looking out over the water. "I never believed your father's threats were real until the day you disappeared," Elise finally admitted, breaking the silence between them. "When you gave me money for the abortion, I realized your family's reputation wasn't exaggerated. The danger was real." Victor flinched at her words, the pain of old wounds still fresh. "I gave you that money to buy time, Elise, not because I wanted to end our child's life," he confessed. "I was searching for a way to stand up to my father to protect both of you. By the time I discovered I was still pregnant, I was already in San Francisco." Elise continued, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself against the chill. "I called to tell you about the supposed miscarriage because I knew it was the only way to keep our baby safe from your world." The revelation hung between them, 20 years of misunderstanding finally clarified in the crisp air above the still lake. "I would have found a way to protect you both," Victor insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "My father's organization was different then, more violent, less stable." "Oh, and now," Elise challenged, turning to face him directly for the first time, "what would happen to Maya if your enemies discovered a Castellano heir who hasn't been raised in the family traditions?" Victor had no answer that would satisfy her, the truth too complex and dangerous to articulate. "She has my name whether she uses it or not," he finally said. "And that means something in Chicago, for better or worse." The sliding door opened as Maya joined them on the dock, her expression serious. "I've been thinking about medical school," she announced without preamble. "I still want to go, but I need to understand exactly what being your daughter means for my future." Victor looked between the two women who should have been his family for the past 20 years, seeing the strength and resilience they had built without him. "It means whatever you want it to mean," he answered carefully. "The Castellano name can open doors or remain your secret." "And what about you and Mom?" Maya asked boldly, addressing the unspoken tension that had been building since their reunion. "There's obviously still something between you despite everything." Elise flushed, embarrassed by her daughter's directness, while Victor looked momentarily caught off guard. "Your mother made the right choice for you," he finally said. "She protected you from a life I wouldn't have wanted for my child either." "That doesn't answer my question." Maya pressed her persistence, revealing her Castellano heritage more clearly than any DNA test could have. 20 years is a long time, but neither of you ever married anyone else." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with 2 decades of might-have-beens and paths not taken. Elise broke it first, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some choices stay with you forever. They become the foundation you build your life upon, for better or worse." Victor's phone rang, shattering the moment with harsh reality. The call was brief, his responses clipped and professional. But when he hung up, both women recognized the gravity in his expression. "The Morettis have escalated beyond what I anticipated," he said. "We can't stay here. We need to move tonight." The setting sun cast long shadows across the dock, turning the tranquil lake into a canvas of crimson and gold that belied the danger closing in around them. Elise instinctively moved closer to Maya, the protective instinct that had guided her choices for 20 years, still her primary compass. Victor watched the subtle movement, understanding flickering in his eyes. This was what he had missed, the countless moments of ordinary love that couldn't be purchased or commanded. His empire of power and fear suddenly seemed hollow, compared to what Elise had built alone, a relationship founded on trust, sacrifice, and unconditional love. The caravan of black SUVs moved swiftly through the darkness, headed toward an undisclosed location Victor assured would be secure. Elise sat beside Maya in the middle vehicle, watching her daughter stare out the window at the passing countryside with worried eyes. "We should be at the hospital," Elise said, suddenly breaking the tense silence. "My shift starts in 4 hours and Maya has exams tomorrow." The normalcy they had fought so hard to maintain was slipping away with each mile. Victor glanced at them in the rearview mirror, his expression grim. The hospital received a bomb threat specifically mentioning the cardiac ward where you work, he explained. It wasn't real, but it was a message meant for me. They know exactly where to find you. The convoy suddenly screeched to a halt as a tree blocked the narrow forest road ahead. Victor's hand went immediately to his weapon, eyes scanning the dense woods surrounding them. Stay in the car, he ordered, voice leaving no room for argument as he conferred with his security team at the front vehicle. Elise reached for Maya's hand, squeezing it tightly as they watched Victor's silhouette against the headlights. Whatever happens, stay down and follow my lead, she whispered, the protective instinct she'd honed for 20 years kicking into high gear. The first bullet shattered the driver's side window of the lead SUV, followed immediately by a coordinated attack from the forest on both sides. Victor dove back into their vehicle, using his body to shield Elise and Maya as bullets peppered the reinforced exterior. Drive, he shouted to his driver, who slammed the vehicle into reverse tires spinning on the gravel road. The other SUVs provided covering fire as they executed a precise retreat maneuver that spoke of extensive training and experience with such ambushes. Maya pressed herself against the floor, eyes wide with terror as the reality of her father's world crashed into her peaceful existence with the force of the bullets striking their vehicle. Is this what your life is always like? She gasped as their vehicle lurched back down the road they had just traveled. Only when someone thinks they can take what's mine, Victor replied, checking his weapon before reaching for the satellite phone secured in the console. His call was brief and coded, but both Elise and Maya understood he was mobilizing reinforcements. The firefight ended as abruptly as it had begun, the attackers melting back into the forest rather than pursuing the retreating convoy. That wasn't meant to succeed, Victor muttered, more to himself than to the others. It was a message, or worse, a distraction. His phone rang immediately, confirming his worst fears. Sir, there's been an explosion at your downtown office, his lieutenant reported, voice tight with controlled panic. Emergency services are responding, but early reports suggest multiple casualties. Victor's face revealed nothing but his knuckles whitened around the phone. Take us to Lakeside Memorial, he instructed his driver, surprising both Elise and Maya. The attack on the office means they don't know where we are. The hospital will be safe for now, and they'll need all available medical personnel. The emergency room was chaos when they arrived, doctors and nurses rushing to treat victims of the explosion. Elise immediately grabbed a set of scrubs from the supply closet, her instincts as a healthcare provider overriding all other concerns. I can help too, Maya insisted, following her mother's lead. I've completed 3 years of pre-med. I know basic triage procedures. The determination in her eyes mirrored Victor's own, revealing her heritage more clearly than any DNA test could have. As they worked alongside the overwhelmed hospital staff, a pattern emerged in the injuries. Most of the victims were not Victor's men, but ordinary office workers, cleaning staff, and civilians who happened to be in the wrong place. They weren't targeting my organization, Victor realized with growing horror. They were making a statement about collateral damage. The irony wasn't lost on him. For decades, he had justified his actions by claiming to insulate innocents from the violence of his world. Yet here were dozens of ordinary Chicagoans bleeding because of a vendetta against him. In the harsh fluorescent light of the emergency room, the carefully constructed walls between his family business and civilian life crumbled. Elise moved with practiced efficiency between patients, her hands steady despite the chaos, occasionally meeting Victor's gaze across the crowded space. No words passed between them, but something fundamental had shifted. They were partners again for the first time in 20 years, fighting together against the consequences of choices made long ago. 3 days after the attack, Victor stood in the hospital corridor, watching Elise and Maya through the window of the doctor's lounge, where they had finally collapsed from exhaustion. Their tireless work had saved dozens of lives, earning respect from the entire medical team, who had no idea of their connection to the man allegedly responsible for the violence. The Moretti family patriarch is requesting a meeting, Victor's lieutenant informed him quietly, keeping a respectful distance from the sleeping women. He claims this has escalated beyond his original intentions and wants to negotiate. Victor nodded, decision made before the question was fully articulated. Arrange it for tomorrow at neutral ground, the old cathedral downtown, he instructed, his eyes never leaving Elise and Maya. And make sure our federal contacts understand that civilian casualties were not my doing. The meeting with Moretti was tense but productive, two old enemies finding common ground in their mutual desire to end bloodshed that had spiraled beyond control. The rival boss, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, carried himself with the same calculated dignity as Victor. Your daughter and her mother must be acknowledged publicly as under Castellano protection, Moretti insisted. Otherwise, this truce means nothing. Every ambitious young soldier in this city will see them as a way to advance. That decision isn't mine to make, Victor replied, surprising both Moretti and himself with his honesty. They've built lives independent of my world, and I won't force them into the spotlight against their will. Moretti raised an eyebrow, a rare show of genuine surprise. Fatherhood has changed you, Castellano. I remember when you would have burned down half the city for less than what we did. Perhaps it has, Victor conceded. Or perhaps I'm simply tired of the old ways. The solution when it came was Elise's idea, a charitable foundation established in Maya's name to support medical education for disadvantaged students. This gives her Castellano protection without Castellano notoriety, Elise explained as they finalized the paperwork in Victor's downtown apartment. The Maya Parker Medical Scholarship Fund. Victor read from the incorporation documents, approval evident in his voice. Funded by anonymous donors, but with the implicit understanding throughout Chicago that it falls under Castellano protection. Maya looked between her parents, seeing the mutual respect that had survived 20 years of separation. I still want to be a doctor, not a mob princess, she clarified her tone, leaving no room for negotiation. This foundation lets me acknowledge my heritage without being defined by it. As spring arrived, bringing new life to Chicago's parks and lakefront, the fragile family they had formed began to find its balance. Victor purchased a brownstone near the hospital where Elise worked, establishing a neutral territory where all three could meet without the shadows of his mansion or the constraints of Elise's small apartment. Medical school acceptance letters came today, Maya announced one evening as they shared dinner in the brownstone's elegant kitchen. I got into Northwestern and Johns Hopkins. Her achievements were her own, earned through years of hard work rather than family connections. Victor couldn't contain his pride, though he tried to temper his reaction to match Elise's more measured response. Whichever you choose, the foundation will cover everything, he assured her. Your focus should be on becoming the best doctor you can be. Actually, Maya began, hesitantly setting down her fork. I'm considering deferring for a year. The statement caught both parents by surprise, their expressions prompting her to continue quickly. I want to work with the foundation, help establish protocols for selecting scholarship recipients. Elise studied her daughter carefully, seeing the determination that had always defined her. This isn't about the scholarships, she said gently. You want time to understand your father's world before you commit to your own path. Is that so wrong? Maya challenged, glancing between her parents. For 20 years, half my identity was hidden from me. I need to understand where I come from before I can truly decide who I want to become. Victor remained silent, emotions warring within him, pride at his daughter's desire to know him, battling with fear of what that knowledge might bring. My world isn't something you can experience temporarily, he finally said. Once people associate you with the Castellano name, that connection never disappears. The discussion continued late into the night, three people navigating the complicated terrain of family identity and the shadows of the past. By morning, they had reached a compromise. Maya would attend Johns Hopkins in the fall, but would spend the summer learning about the legitimate businesses Victor had built, while the foundation would become a family project they could share regardless of distance. As Victor drove home that night, the weight of fatherhood heavy on his shoulders, he reflected on how completely his life had changed in just a few months. For years, he had built walls, physical and emotional, to protect himself from vulnerability. Now those walls were crumbling, replaced by bridges connecting him to a daughter he never knew and a woman he had never stopped loving. The danger wasn't over. The Moretti truce was tenuous at best, and there would always be ambitious young men looking to make their mark by challenging the established order. But for the first time in decades, Victor Castellano had something more valuable than power or territory to protect. He had a family, however unconventional it might be. As he pulled into his mansion's driveway, his security chief approached with an urgent expression. There's something you need to see, boss, he said, handing Victor a manila envelope. Inside were photographs, surveillance shots of Maya at school, Elise at the hospital, the brownstone where they had dinner. and attached to each image was a simple note: "The Morettis aren't your only problem." Victor's blood ran cold as he realized the game had changed once again. Someone else knew about his daughter, someone who had been watching long before Victor himself discovered her existence. The question was who Victor Castellano had faced countless threats over his decades leading Chicago's most powerful crime family. He had weathered federal investigations, rival families, and internal betrayals with the calculating calm that had become his trademark. But the photographs in his hand, surveillance shots of his newly discovered daughter and her mother, sent ice through his veins in a way no business threat ever could. Someone had been watching Maya long before he even knew she existed. The question tormented him as he summoned his most trusted security advisor to his study, a wood-paneled sanctuary that had witnessed 3 generations of Castellano family decisions. "Find out who took these," Victor ordered, sliding the photos across his mahogany desk. "I want to know everything: who they work for, how long they've been watching, what they want." The security chief nodded, his expression grave. "The timestamp on some of these photos dates back 6 months, boss. Long before you knew about her." Victor leaned back in his leather chair, mind racing through possibilities. The Morettis were formidable enemies, but this level of long-term surveillance suggested something else, something more calculated and patient. "Increase security on the brownstone and around the hospital, but keep it subtle," he instructed. "I don't want to alarm them unnecessarily." After his advisor left, Victor remained in his study, gazing at a photo of Maya at her university graduation, a moment he'd missed, captured by an unknown watcher. His daughter's smile, so like her mother's, gazed back at him from the glossy paper. For 20 years, he had built an empire based on calculated risk and strategic violence. Now, for the first time, he felt a fear that transcended business, the primal fear of a father for his child's safety. His phone rang, displaying Elisa's number. They had established a tenuous routine of daily check-ins since the Moretti incident. Her voice, when he answered, carried the warm efficiency he remembered from their past. "Maya's been accepted into a prestigious research program at Johns Hopkins," she reported, pride evident in her tone. "She'll be working with Dr. Abrams on pediatric cancer treatments." "That's wonderful," Victor replied, choosing not to share the new threat. "Not yet, not over the phone. We should celebrate. Dinner at the brownstone tomorrow." "That sounds nice," Elise agreed, and Victor detected a softness in her voice that had been absent in their early encounters. 20 years of separation had not diminished the connection between them. It had simply driven it underground, like a river finding its path beneath the earth. The brownstone Victor had purchased near Elisa's hospital had become neutral territory for their unconventional family, a place where Maya could connect with her father without the intimidating trappings of his mansion or the cramped reminders of the life she'd lived without him in Elisa's apartment. As Victor prepared for the dinner, selecting a bottle of wine from his cellar, his security chief returned with preliminary findings. "The surveillance isn't Moretti style," he reported. "This is professional work, government level or very high-end private." Victor's mind immediately turned to federal agencies. His organization had maintained a delicate dance with law enforcement for years, legitimate enough on paper to avoid prosecution, but always under scrutiny. "Could they be using my daughter to get to me?" he asked, the question burning in his throat. "Possibly," his advisor admitted, "but there's something else. Some of these photos go back further than we initially thought. We found metadata suggesting surveillance began when Maya was still in high school." The implications sent Victor's mind spinning. Someone had known about his daughter for years, perhaps had always known. But who and why maintain surveillance without using that knowledge as leverage? These questions plagued him as he arrived at the brownstone, wine in hand, security discreetly positioned around the perimeter. The domesticity of the scene that greeted him. Elise in the kitchen, Maya setting the table, created a surreal contrast to the danger he feared was closing in around them. "Congratulations on the research position," Victor said, embracing his daughter with genuine pride. "Dr. Abrams is world-renowned in his field." Maya beamed, her academic accomplishments a source of confidence as she navigated the complicated reality of her newfound father. "His work on targeted immunotherapies is groundbreaking." She explained, her passion for medicine evident in her animated gestures. "The position is usually reserved for postdoctoral fellows, but he made an exception." Throughout dinner, Victor maintained an outward calm, participating in discussions about Maya's future while inwardly calculating risks and contingencies. He had spent decades protecting his business interests. Now he needed to protect something infinitely more precious. "You're distracted tonight," Elise observed as they cleared the dinner plates, Maya having stepped outside to take a call from a classmate. Her medical training had honed her ability to detect subtle changes in behavior, a skill that had made her an exceptional nurse and an even more perceptive mother. Victor hesitated, then decided on honesty. "There's a new complication," he admitted, keeping his voice low. "Someone has been watching Maya and you for years, long before I knew about her." Elise's hand froze midway to the dishwasher, her face paling under the kitchen lights. "Who?" She whispered, the single word carrying the weight of 20 years of protective vigilance. "I don't know yet," Victor answered, the admission difficult for a man accustomed to having answers. "But I will find out." The sliding door opened as Maya returned, catching the tension between her parents. "What's wrong?" she asked, her perceptiveness, another trait inherited from her mother. Victor and Elise exchanged a glance, a silent negotiation about how much to share. It was Elise who decided with a slight nod toward Victor. "Someone has been watching you," Victor explained carefully. "We don't know who yet, but they've had you under surveillance for some time." Maya absorbed this information with remarkable composure, another reminder to Victor of the strength she had inherited from both parents. "Because I'm your daughter?" she asked directly. "Most likely," Victor acknowledged, "though the timeline suggests they knew about our connection before I did." Maya considered this, her analytical mind, honed through years of scientific education, approaching the problem methodically. "Could it be someone from your father's era? Someone who knew about me and your relationship?" The question struck Victor with unexpected force. He had been focusing on current enemies, federal agencies, and rival families. But Maya's suggestion opened a new possibility, one that reached back to his father's time. "It's possible," he conceded. "There aren't many still alive who would have known, but yes, it's possible." The evening ended with heightened vigilance, Victor insisting on additional security measures while trying to maintain the normalcy Elise and Maya valued. As he prepared to leave, Maya stopped him at the door. "I still want to work with the foundation this summer," she said firmly. "I won't let threats change our plans." Victor recognized the determined set of her jaw, the same expression he saw in the mirror when facing down challenges. "The foundation stays," he agreed, "but with additional precautions." The Maya Parker Medical Scholarship Fund had become more than a protective cover. It represented a bridge between the separate worlds of the Castellano power and the Parker principles. Over the following weeks, Maya threw herself into establishing selection criteria for scholarship recipients, working from a secure office in Victor's legitimate business headquarters. Victor watched his daughter with growing admiration as she navigated board meetings and fundraising discussions with natural poise. She had inherited his strategic mind and her mother's compassionate heart, a combination that made her a formidable presence even among seasoned executives. Meanwhile, his security team continued investigating the surveillance, meticulously tracing the sophisticated operation back through shell companies and private contractors. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a routine review of his father's old associate list. Antonio Donato, his security chief, reported placing a file on Victor's desk. "Former consigliere to your father, retired to Florida 15 years ago. His security firm has been tracking Maya since she was 16. The name struck Victor like a physical blow. Antonio Donato, his father's most trusted advisor, and the father of Maria Donato, the woman Victor had been expected to marry before he met Elise. "The marriage alliance," Victor murmured, memories flooding back. "The one I refused because of Elise." His security chief nodded. "Donato lost significant standing when that alliance fell through. Your father pushed him out of the inner circle shortly after your situation with Miss Parker." Victor stared at the photograph in the file, an elderly man with cold eyes lounging on a yacht in Miami waters. Antonio Donato had been a calculating presence throughout Victor's youth, always watching, always assessing. The realization that those same eyes had been on his daughter for years filled him with cold rage. "Bring him to me," Victor ordered, his voice deadly calm. Quietly, respectfully, but bring him. 3 days later, Antonio Donato sat across from Victor in the same study where 23 years earlier, Don Castellano had ordered Victor to end his relationship with Elise. At 78, Donato retained the sharp intelligence and dignified bearing that had made him a valuable advisor to the old Don. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his linen suit pristine, despite the journey from Florida. You've done well for yourself, Victor, Donato observed, accepting the glass of scotch Victor offered. Your father would be proud of what you've built. Let's not pretend this is a social call, Antonio, Victor replied, remaining standing while his guest sat. You've been watching my daughter for years. I want to know why. A thin smile crossed Donato's weathered face. Insurance, he answered simply. Your father and I had an agreement. My Maria would marry you, uniting our families. When you chose that nurse instead, certain assurances were made. Victor's mind raced back to those turbulent days, his father's rage, his own desperate attempts to find a way out for Elise and their unborn child. What assurances, he demanded. Your father promised that if anything happened to him, I would remain protected within the organization, Donato explained, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. But when he died, you restructured everything. My position, my influence, all gone. That was business, Antonio, nothing personal. Perhaps, the old man conceded, but I needed leverage. When I discovered your little secret that the nurse had lied about losing the baby, I knew I had found it. The revelation landed like a grenade in Victor's carefully constructed world. My father knew, he asked, his voice barely audible. He knew Elise was still pregnant. Donato's smile widened fractionally. Of course he knew. Don Castellano knew everything that happened in his city. He had men following her when she fled to San Francisco. But he never told me, Victor whispered more to himself than his guest. The betrayal from beyond the grave burned in his chest. Why keep it from me? Because you were weak for her, Donato stated bluntly. He needed you focused on the family, not distracted by some woman and a child. He said you would thank him someday for making you choose the family. Victor turned away, gazing out the window at the Chicago skyline, the empire he had built on the foundation of his father's lies. For 20 years he had believed Elise's deception had kept their daughter from him, when in reality it had been his own father's manipulation. And now, Victor asked, turning back to face his father's former advisor, what do you want from me now, Antonio? The old man set down his glass. Recognition of what's owed. A proper place for my family within your organization. The respect that was promised to me by your father. Victor studied the man before him, a relic of the old ways of his father's era of blood oaths and family vendettas. The world Antonio Donato understood was disappearing, replaced by Victor's more sophisticated network of legitimate businesses and political influence. Those days are over, Victor said quietly. The organization doesn't operate that way anymore. Donato's expression hardened. Then perhaps it's time Chicago remembered the old ways. The photographs are just the beginning, Victor. I have documentation of your father's activities that would interest federal prosecutors. And I have people still watching your daughter, your vulnerabilities. The threat hung in the air between them, a reminder that the past was never truly buried, only temporarily entombed. Victor moved to his desk, pressing a hidden button beneath the edge. You've made your point, Antonio, he conceded. Let me consider your request. In the meantime, you'll stay as my guest. My staff will show you to one of the guest suites. As if on cue, two security personnel appeared at the study door. Donato rose with dignified caution, recognizing the thinly veiled detention for what it was. Don't take too long to consider, Victor. My insurance policies have deadlines. After Donato was escorted out, Victor placed an urgent call to Elise. We need to meet, all three of us. Tonight. The brownstone kitchen, which had hosted numerous family dinners over recent months, now served as a war room, as Victor explained the situation to Elise and Maya. The revelation about Don Castellano's knowledge stunned Elise, her hands trembling as she absorbed the implications. He knew where I was, she whispered. All those years looking over my shoulder, changing jobs, moving apartments to stay under the radar, and he knew all along. But he never acted on it, Victor noted. He let you raise Maya in peace away from the family. Because it served his purpose, Elise countered bitterly. He got what he wanted, you fully committed to the Castellano empire without distractions. Maya, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. What does Donato want now? After all these years? Power, Victor answered simply. Recognition, a return to the old hierarchy where family connections determined everything. And if you refuse, Maya pressed, Victor met his daughter's gaze directly. He threatens to expose family secrets to federal authorities, and to continue watching you implying a threat. Maya absorbed this with remarkable composure. So our options are to give in to his demands or face exposure and possible danger. Those are his terms, Victor confirmed. There's a third option, Elise suggested quietly. We could disappear new identities, new location, like you suggested before. Maya could transfer to a medical school abroad. The suggestion hung in the air, a practical solution from a woman who had successfully hidden for 20 years. But Maya was already shaking her head. No, she said firmly. I won't run. We've built something important with the foundation. I won't abandon those students who are counting on those scholarships. Victor felt a surge of pride at his daughter's resolve, so like her mother's moral certainty, yet with a touch of his own refusal to back down from a challenge. There might be another way, he said slowly, an idea forming. Something neither Donato nor my father would have anticipated. The following day, Victor requested a meeting with his most trusted lieutenants and legal advisors. The plan he outlined was unprecedented, a complete restructuring of the Castellano holdings and influence. The legitimate businesses will be consolidated under Castellano Enterprises, he explained, indicating the complex organizational charts his team had prepared overnight. All assets, properties, and interests will be legally transferred to this new corporate structure. His consigliere Michael studied the documents with growing concern. And the other operations, he asked carefully, will be systematically wound down, Victor stated, or converted to legitimate enterprises where possible. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. What Victor proposed amounted to the most significant transformation in the organization's history, essentially dismantling the criminal empire that had taken 3 generations to build. This is because of the daughter, one lieutenant observed bluntly. Victor met the man's gaze steadily. This is because the world has changed. Our strength has always come from adaptation. The old ways are becoming too costly, too vulnerable. The transition would take months, perhaps years, but the declaration of intent was immediate and unequivocal. The Castellano organization would transform itself into a legitimate corporate entity, maintaining its influence through legal channels rather than fear and violence. Antonio Donato received this news in Victor's study, his weathered face revealing nothing as Victor outlined the transformation. You're ending it all, Donato observed. Everything your father built. I'm evolving it, Victor corrected. The power remains, the influence remains. Only the methods change. In my place in this new order, Victor slid a document across the desk. A position on the board of Castellano Enterprises with appropriate compensation. Your family connections recognized and respected. But no return to the old ways, Antonio. Those days are finished. The old man studied the offer, understanding both what was given and what was forever denied. Your father would call you weak, he said finally. My father lied to me about my own child, Victor replied, his voice level but intent. His judgment stopped mattering to me the moment I learned that truth. Donato signed the agreement, understanding that Victor's offer was both generous and final. The surveillance operation would cease. The documentation of past sins would remain sealed. In return, the Donato family would maintain a respected, if reduced, position within the new corporate structure. As spring advanced towards summer, the Maya Parker Medical Scholarship Fund announced its first 10 recipients, promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds who would receive full funding for medical school. The foundation's headquarters, housed in a renovated historical building near Northwestern's medical campus, hosted the announcement ceremony with Maya presiding. Victor watched from the back of the room as his daughter addressed the gathering of donors, administrators, and scholarship recipients. At 20, she displayed a poise and purpose that left him in awe. Here was his legacy, not the empire of fear he had inherited, but something built on hope and possibility. Elise stood beside him, her presence a reminder of the road not taken and the second chance they had been given. She's extraordinary, she whispered. Everything I hoped she would become. Because of you, oh, Victor replied, his voice rough with emotion. You gave her the foundation to become this person. Elise's hand found his fingers intertwining with the familiarity that the 20 years of separation had not erased. Perhaps we both contributed something worthwhile, she conceded. The prestigious Johns Hopkins Medical School auditorium buzzed with excitement 4 years later as families gathered for the graduation ceremony. In the front row, Victor Castellano sat beside Elise Parker, their hands occasionally brushing in a gesture that spoke of reconciliation and something deeper that had slowly rekindled over the years. Dr. Maya Parker Castellano took him, the dean announced, and cheers erupted from their section as Maya crossed the stage to receive her diploma. Her journey had not been easy, balancing rigorous medical training with occasional trips home to help manage the foundation that now supported dozens of aspiring healthcare workers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Victor beamed with pride, remembering the frightened young waitress from the Golden Crown restaurant who had unwittingly changed the course of all their lives with one simple observation about a tattoo. The constellation pattern still circled his wrist, though now it was matched by a smaller version on Maya's ankle, her graduation gift to herself. "She has your determination," Victor whispered to Elise as they watched their daughter accept additional honors for her research in pediatric oncology. "And your heart." The compliment was sincere, acknowledging that Elise's choices had shaped Maya into someone far better than the Castellano influence alone would have produced. Elise smiled the years of tension and fear, finally settling into a peaceful acceptance of their unusual family dynamic. "She has your strategic mind," she countered. "The way she organized that fundraising campaign last year was pure Castellano diplomacy." The changes in Victor himself were perhaps the most profound of all. While still heading his organization, he had accelerated the family's transition toward legitimacy, using his influence to establish medical clinics in underserved Chicago neighborhoods, and gradually distancing himself from the more dangerous aspects of his empire. "I've been offered the chief resident position at Chicago Memorial," Maya revealed during their celebration dinner that evening. "I'd be working in pediatric oncology starting this fall." The announcement surprised both parents, who had assumed she would remain on the East Coast to complete her residency. "Are you sure about returning to Chicago?" Elise asked carefully, understanding all the implications of her daughter's choice. "Your reputation there will always be complicated by your connection to your father." Maya nodded, her decision clearly well considered. "That's precisely why I need to be there," she explained. "The foundation is making real difference, and I want to be hands-on with the scholarship recipients starting their medical careers in our hometown." Victor watched his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing the strength that allowed her to embrace both sides of her heritage without being consumed by either. "The Castellano name will open doors," he acknowledged, "but your skill will keep them open." "Actually," Maya said with a smile, "I've decided to use both names professionally. Dr. Maya Parker Castellano." Her declaration represented the final reconciliation of her divided identity, claiming both her mother's careful protection and her father's powerful legacy. Later that evening, as Maya chatted with former classmates at the hotel bar, Victor and Elise found themselves alone on the terrace overlooking the Baltimore harbor. The years had softened their edges, turning youthful passion into something more enduring and complex. A passing boat's lights danced across the water's surface, momentarily illuminating Elise's face with the same golden glow Victor remembered from their first summer together. The constellation tattoo peeking from beneath her sleeve caught the light, a permanent reminder of promises made and broken under different stars. Behind them, through the glass doors of the hotel, they could see Maya laughing with friends, her gestures animated as she told some story, unaware of her parents watching. "She's remarkable," Victor said, watching the lights reflect on the water. "Everything I could have hoped for in a daughter, and nothing I deserved after how things ended between us." The admission came easier now, years of co-parenting having taught him a humility his younger self had lacked. Elise turned toward him, studying the face she had once known better than her own. "We both made mistakes," she acknowledged, her voice gentle in the evening air. "But protecting her was never one of mine, even if the method wasn't what either of us would have chosen." The constellation tattoo on Victor's wrist caught the moonlight as he reached for Elise's hand, a gesture that had become increasingly natural over the past 5 years. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if we'd found another way?" He asked, the question that had haunted him for 2 decades finally spoken aloud. "Every day," Elise admitted, her fingers intertwining with his. "But then we wouldn't have the daughter we have shaped by both worlds instead of trapped in either." The wisdom of her perspective struck Victor anew, reminding him why he had never stopped loving her, despite 20 years of separation. Their relationship had evolved gradually from cautious co-parents to reluctant allies, to friends, and now to something neither could quite define but both treasured. "I'm retiring next year," Victor announced suddenly, the decision crystallizing in that moment, though it had been forming for some time. turning everything over to legitimate management and stepping away from the organization completely. The declaration hung between them, heavy with implication. Elise studied him carefully, searching for the truth behind his words. "And then what?" she asked. The question simple but loaded with 2 decades of complicated history and 5 years of careful rebuilding. Victor's answer came in the form of a small velvet box he'd carried in his pocket throughout Maya's graduation ceremony. "And then if you're willing, we try again the right way this time," he said, opening it to reveal not a diamond, but a gold pendant bearing the same constellation pattern as their tattoos. Elise took the pendant, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern that had once represented their dreams under summer stars. 20 years is a long time," she said softly. "Not compared to the time we still have," Victor replied, his voice carrying the quiet certainty that had always been his strength. As they looked back through the glass at their daughter, the miraculous result of love sacrifice and second chances, Elise's answer came not in words, but in the closing of distance between them. The kiss they shared on the moonlit terrace was both an ending and a beginning, the final chapter of their past and the first page of a future neither had dared to imagine possible. The constellation tattoo that had once marked a love story interrupted now symbolized a circle, completed a pattern of stars guiding 3 lives back to each other against impossible odds.